Welcome to Candlewick Library. I'm Cheryl, and today is part two talking about the Jurassic Park book by Michael Crichton. This again will have major spoilers. I am going chapter by chapter, talking about a lot of the things that are in the book. So if you have not read it and have not seen the movie, you will not want to watch this unless you don't care about being spoiled. I want to share something that I keep forgetting to share. I have a Discord. I haven't used it very often in the past, but I had set it up when I was doing the Harry Potter readathon. So I am setting up sections for the Jurassic Reading Challenge, and I will have a little monthly spot to talk about what you're reading each month if you're participating in that. And there's also other places where you can just chat about anything. So I am going to try to be good at updating it and being involved with it. And I've started linking it in my videos, but I keep forgetting to announce it on here. I made a post talking about it, but I keep forgetting to say anything in videos. So if you do use Discord and you're interested, I will have that linked in the description. I left off on the 5th iteration. So the first chapter of that is Search. In this, Muldoon and Gennaro are out checking for the animals when Arnold gets a hold of them and tells them that they have finally found Nedry on the camera. So they are able to get to the Jeep and to get back those rocket launchers. During this time, Grant and the kids are still on the raft going down the river, and they are arriving at the aviary that has been talked about before as something that is not finished because they call them pterodactyls, have been dive bombing the construction crew, and so it isn't safe. They are very large. They do start attacking Grant and the children. One bites Lex, her head is bleeding, so they are trying to run back to the raft. One tries to pick up Lex, and Grant knocks it off of her, and we see the animal walking on its wings. It also steals Lex's baseball glove. We get to see this whole scene that does not show up in the movie, with them walking on their wings, with them trying to pick up someone. That will come into play in a later movie. So they get back on the raft. They start going back down the river. Grant starts talking to them about how the dinosaurs could be breeding, with it only being females. Then the T-Rex shows up again, and its head is coming through the foliage. It can't get to them, but it's trying to. And then they hear a hooting. And because of the whole situation with Nedry, we know what that means, and you start to get nervous about what they are going to encounter on this river. We get one of my favorite parts with Ian Malcolm here when they are starting to talk about science again. So we're back at the lodge, and Ellie says to Malcolm, "You don't really think that much of Arnold, do you?" And Malcolm says, "He's all right. He's an engineer. Wu's the same. They're both technicians. They don't have intelligence. They have what I call thin intelligence. They see the immediate situation. They think narrowly, and they call it being focused. They don't see the surround. They don't see the consequences. That is how you get an island like this, from thin intelligent thinking, because you cannot make an animal and not expect it to act alive, to be unpredictable, to escape, but they don't see that." This is something that I've thought about in the last few years a lot, because it seems like every once in a while you hear about different scientific experiments, different scientific research that doesn't seem to be something that we need. Sometimes I just hear about something and I think, why are we researching that particular thing when there's all these other things that would really help humans? And it does seem like so often people get an idea and they want to research that idea, and they don't think about the big picture or what could possibly happen. And they really don't expect that thing to get away from them. We think we have so much more control than we do. And that is something that I, as a person, deal with sometimes, because I want to be in control of situations. I hate the feeling of not being in control of something. You have to come to a place where you realize you don't have control over just about anything, if anything. So when he started talking about this, I thought, this is something that we all do. But it's really easy to point the finger at the bigger people, at the scientists and stuff like that. But we also all do it in a smaller way in our own world. And we have to get better at thinking through everything that is a big decision in a way where we see the peripheral and not just this laser focused thing that we think can't get away from us, if that makes sense. And then he goes on, he's talking about how scientists say that they are seeking to know the truth about nature, which is true, but that's not what drives them. Nobody is driven by abstractions like seeking truth. I would disagree a little bit. I think that there probably are some that are, but I understand why Malcolm is coming at this, and especially in this situation where he is drugged up and he is in critical condition and he is getting everything out that he feels, part of his chaos theory, all of that. Just like everybody else, I come to conclusions about everything in the world. You know, I have a lot of opinions, and most of them come from lots and lots of research. and listening to both sides of an argument or story and trying to figure out what I think makes the most sense. And sometimes I'm wrong, sometimes I'm right. What I think that a lot of people don't often see is that we immediately assume if someone comes to a different conclusion than us, and I talked about this a little bit in the last video, that they aren't seeking truth. And I think that that is a dangerous assumption because for me, I am always seeking truth. That is all I'm seeking. I don't care if I'm right or wrong. I just want to know what's right, what's true. Scientists are actually preoccupied with accomplishment. So they are focused on whether they can do something. They never stop to ask if they should do something. And of course, that is one of Ian Malcolm's most famous lines. I think it would have been great if in the movie, and I'll get to that in that video, but I wish that they would have had the whole part. That are they seeking truth or accomplishment? Because that is a really big distinction. Ellie, she says that he is exaggerating about this rape of the natural world that all progress is. And he says to her, well, what about when you do your digs? Do you guys leave this pristine environment behind when you're done? And she says, no, actually, it's a pretty big mess afterward. But it's just the Badlands. And Malcolm says, just the Badlands, just trash, just byproducts, just side effects. I'm trying to tell you that scientists want it this way. They want byproducts and trash and scars and side effects. It's a way of reassuring themselves. It's built into the fabric of science, and it's increasingly a disaster. And then she brings up, well, what about all the advances in life? And he says, the number of hours women devote to housework has not changed since 1930, despite all the advances. All the vacuum cleaners, washer dryers, trash compactors, garbage disposals, wash and wear fabrics. Why does it still take as long to clean the house as it did in 1930? And this really made me stop and think for a minute because I thought, well, wait, that's not true. If you had to wash clothes by hand and put all your clothes out on the clothing line and you didn't have vacuums and you didn't have dishwashers, and then I thought about how when I was growing up, most of the time we didn't have a dishwasher. And it was one of our chores as kids in the family. We each took turns washing the dishes at night for dinner. I do remember having at least one night a week that was my dish duty night. It really didn't take that long to wash the dishes. And I was thinking about this because when I do my dishwasher, it takes about 2 to 3 hours depending on how big the load is. It did not take me that long to do dishes by hand. It's just easier. When I'm washing clothes, it takes a certain amount of time. Would it take that long if I was doing it by hand? I don't know. And so my wheels in my head just started spinning of like, maybe it is just the convenience, but not necessarily saving us time. And then we fill up our time with all these other things. Plus, we have so many more things because of the fact that it is easier to have more things, then we have more things. It's easier to wash clothes, so we have more clothes. It's easier to clean the dishes, so we use more dishes. So we get these advances that save us time, but then we add things so it costs us more time. It just was quite the rabbit hole that my brain went down after reading this section, even though I've read this before. So I think that that's interesting, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on that. He brings up ancient people and says 30,000 years ago, when men were doing cave paintings, they worked 20 hours a week to provide themselves with food and shelter and clothing. The rest of the time, they could play or sleep or do whatever they wanted. And they lived in a natural world with clean air, clean water, beautiful trees, and sunsets. Think about it, 20 hours a week, 30,000 years ago. I want people to wake up. We've had 400 years of modern science, and we ought to know by now what it's good for and what it's not good for. It's time for a change. This is one of the things I love about Michael Crichton, and he uses Ian Malcolm in this book to get these points across. He does always make me think. He was such a brilliant mind. I have found that so many times it seems like people who do have a medical background and science is huge in their life, they don't tend to argue these kind of things as much as you think that they would. And I think that's why Ian Malcolm is pointing at scientists in general. It is also another thing that I have thought about a lot in life is sometimes here in Utah, you'll drive down the freeway and there are just businesses everywhere, especially at a place that's called the Point of the Mountain. It's in between Salt Lake County and Utah County. I don't even know how many. There are so many tech companies and new ones pop up all the time. If I'm not the one driving, of course, I sit and I look at all of these businesses that line both sides of the freeway and I ask, okay, what does that one do? What does that one do? What does that one do? And a lot of times they either do the same thing or something I've never even heard of. And sometimes it's interesting to think about how we went from these families that their job was their family. It was a farm, it was taking care of your own food and your animals, and then in the house taking care of the house and raising your children. And then there were the people that had like the little store in town, and then there was a doctor, then there was a teacher, there was a pastor. How simple that seems, where now everybody's leaving their home for most of the day, every day. And how many of those jobs are even needed? How many of those businesses are even needed? And I don't know, I would love to also hear your thoughts about that, because for me, my mind, again, it just keeps going and going and going and thinking of all these things, because I think, okay, well, that's a cool job, but why? I just don't think that the way we used to live would work anymore with how many people there are. But there's a really big part of me that wishes we could. When I watch things like Anne of Green Gables or Road to Avonlea, which was a TV show set in the same area as Anne of Green Gables, I am so drawn to that lifestyle and I wish we could do it. And yet, I love the modern conveniences like air conditioning and washer and dryers and all of those things that do make things easier. And I think that there's this tear sometimes in me, mental tug of war between those two worlds. When I'm reading Ian Malcolm, it takes me to that place where I think, gosh, how much of what we are creating as humans is raping the natural world rather than adding to it. He always brings up things that, like I said, I'm thinking about long after I've put down the book. All right, back to the story. So on the river, they see the Dilophosaurus that were hooting, but they are distracted by the T-Rex. So they are able to go right past them without the T-Rex or the Dilophosaurus getting to them. And then back at Control, they are able to pick up where the T-Rex is. So Muldoon and Gennaro are on their way to get that T-Rex. Arnold says, take it easy with him. It's our main tourist attraction. And I couldn't believe that at this point in the book, Arnold is still thinking this is going to work. This park will open. We will invite so many more people here to experience this. And then Muldoon says to Gennaro, raptors are smart, very smart, believe me. All the problems we have so far are nothing compared with what we'd have if the raptors ever got out of their holding pens, which lets us know that at this point, Muldoon does not know that there have been sightings of the raptors outside the cages. Or if he does know that, he doesn't believe it. They find the T-Rex, he shoots at it and misses. And then he shoots again and believes that he misses again. So he jumps in the Jeep, they drive off, it chases them, but then eventually it stops before catching up with them. They are going back to the base to get more canisters. And so then we go back to the raft, and they are going on the river really fast. They go over a waterfall, of course, because you cannot have a story with people on a raft without them going over a waterfall. And the T-Rex has made it to the bottom of that waterfall waiting for them. I was so sad when this wasn't in the first movie, but we'll talk about that later because there's more to that story as well. Grant gets to shore when they get to the bottom. He gets the kids and they find a path that goes up behind the waterfall. So they go up there and they find a door. It has a keypad, but it does have the code written right on it. So Alan Grant is able to put in the key code and get through the door. But when he goes in, Lex doesn't want to go in. And so the door closes behind him and he hears sniffling and the sound of claws on concrete. He goes down some stairs. He finds a little electric car that looks kind of like a golf cart. And then he turns around just as a pale shape is leaping toward him. I remember at this point, the first time I read it, being like, oh my gosh, Alan Grant is going to die in this book. And the kids were going to be separated and alone with a T-Rex nearby. I was pretty nervous, but he does have that dart gun still and he fires it. And the raptor lands on him and it is just a young one. He says it's only about 2 feet tall and he sees that it is a male. So this is proof that the dinosaurs are breeding for sure. He tries again to get to get the kids, but he cannot get through the door. And meanwhile, the T-Rex realizes where they're at. He starts coming through the waterfall, his head coming through, his tongue whipping around to try to get the kids. And he does. He gets Tim, but then just when you don't know how Tim is going to get out of this, the tongue releases him and the Rex falls. Since we know that he had been shot by Muldoon and Muldoon thought he was sure that he got him, but then was like, well, I must have missed because it didn't knock him out. We realized it just took a while for it to kick in. So he has now been tranquilized. I guess I should say she, but they do that in the book too, that they know that the big T-Rex is a female, but they call it a he. So I guess it makes sense. The next chapter is called Control, and Arnold definitely thinks the park is back in control. The kids are able to get through the door because the power goes off again. And so the door opens. But when that power goes off, They're looking at the screens and they realize back at control that all of the fences have been off for 5 hours, and this includes the raptor fences. So Muldoon takes control and he tells Arnold, "You're going to go to the maintenance shed, and Wu is going to stay in the control room since he's the only one that knows anything about computers. Hammond, you go back to the lodge and lock yourself into your room." He tells Gennaro, "If you're too afraid, go to the lodge with him." But Gennaro does decide to help Muldoon with trying to get the raptors. So they go outside to try to help Arnold get to the shed. And of course, raptors do come. And Muldoon does injure one's leg. Arnold runs into the shed, and the raptors turn on Muldoon and Gennaro. They hear screams and go running off in different directions. Both of the raptors then follow Muldoon. We see so quickly how Arnold thought they were under control again. Hammond has never really admitted that they were out of control. Once Arnold thought they were in control of everything again, how quickly it goes crazy again. So when Hammond goes back to the lodge, then he is reunited with Malcolm, and he starts talking to him about how this was all very simple, that this whole park was really very simple to create. And Malcolm says, "Simple? You're a bigger fool than I thought you were, and I thought you were a very substantial fool." And here we get another great Malcolm speech about power and knowledge. And he says, "Most kinds of power require a substantial sacrifice by whoever wants the power. There is an apprenticeship, a discipline lasting many years. Whatever kind of power you want, president of the company, black belt in karate, spiritual guru, whatever it is you seek, you have to put in the time, the practice, the effort. You must give up a lot to get it. It has to be very important to you. And once you have attained it, it is your power. It can't be given away. It resides in you. It is literally the result of your discipline. By the time someone has acquired the ability to kill with his bare hands, he has also matured to the point where he won't use it unwisely. So that kind of power has a built-in control. The discipline of getting the power changes you so that you won't abuse it. But scientific power is like inherited wealth, attained without discipline. You read what others have done and you take the next step. You can do it very young. You can make progress very fast. There is no discipline lasting many decades. There is no mastery. Old scientists are ignored. There is no humility before nature. There is only a get rich quick, make a name for yourself fast philosophy. Cheat, lie, falsify. It doesn't matter. Not to you or to your colleagues. No one will criticize you. No one has any standards. They are all trying to do the same thing, to do something big and to do it fast. And because you can stand on the shoulders of giants, you can accomplish something quickly. You don't even know exactly what you've done, but already you have reported it, patented it, and sold it. And the buyer will have even less discipline than you. The buyer simply purchases the power like any commodity. The buyer doesn't even conceive that any discipline might be necessary. It is so true. And we see this all of the time in our world. We see people who use someone else's knowledge and make something new, and they don't understand the power. And us as consumers, how often do we just jump onto the next big thing without thinking about what the consequences might be? Ian Malcolm, his whole entire job, I think, is to remind all of us how much we should be looking at the big picture and possible consequences before we just jump into something because it seems cool. Arnold is in the shed now, but it's too dark, so he does something very stupid and he props open the door with his shoe, knowing there's raptors outside that have been chasing him. But of course, they still are thinking that they're in control. And he's not going to think that a raptor is going to be able to be smart enough to come and see the shoe and know that he can get that door open and that somebody's in there. They should know how smart raptors are based on their observations of them before this, but he doesn't. He doesn't even think about it. Muldoon is trapped in a pipe, and the raptors are at one end trying to get to him. So we are going back and forth as the tensions are rising, and Arnold is attacked by the raptor that comes in after him, of course. Gennaro then ends up back at that maintenance shed as well, and he trips over the shoe. And at first I thought, okay, he's going to be smart enough to then move it and close the door, although he would have been trapped in with the raptor. It's already in there. But he doesn't. He props it open again. He hears a snarl and then blood drips on him. He sees the raptor perched on the pipes a few feet above him. He realizes that this raptor is injured, so this must be the one that Muldoon had shot. He is yanked off his feet by the raptor. So, of course, we are thinking, okay, he's dead too. We go back to the lodge, and Malcolm is still giving his lectures to everybody. And he says, science can make a nuclear reactor, but it cannot tell us not to build it. Science can make pesticide, but cannot tell us not to use it. And this goes back to the exact point I was making. He is trying to remind us that not everything should be done. We need to know we're not in control. and we're never in control. Then it is time for the sixth iteration, return. So Grant and the kids are now in that little electrical car and they are driving through tunnels. So they are on their way back, finally making good time. They've got the little raptor in the car with them because Grant thinks this is going to be what I need to prove to them that the animals are breeding, because of course they have no idea what's going on back at the lodge. In fact, when they pull up in front of the visitor center, Lex jumps out saying, "Yay, no more dinosaurs," because they feel like they're going to be safe now. But they open up the door, they go into the visitor center, and they find a complete disaster. The security guard at the front is dead, so Grant uses his radio to try to get a hold of somebody. He does, and they tell him the raptors are out, and guess what? They can open doors. He tells them, "I need to warn this boat. There's raptors on the boat. That's one of the biggest reasons I've been trying to get back here so fast. We need to warn them." And they say, "Well, we need power to do that, and it will take a while." And he says, "I don't have half an hour." And they tell him they need power right away because there are two raptors on the roof of the lodge above Malcolm's bed, and there are electrical bars there. But since they aren't on right now, those raptors are chewing through all the bars to get into them. They've already broken the glass. It shattered down onto Malcolm's bed. Muldoon has been able to get back there. I cannot remember right now how he got out of the log and back there, but he gets back there. He says, "We'll cause a diversion so you can now go to the maintenance shade and see what's happening and why the power isn't on yet." And Ellie volunteers to be the diversion. Wu tells him to leave the kids in the cafeteria. And so the kids go into the kitchen. They think that in that visitor center now they are safe because they think all the raptors are out where they can see them. Ellie goes out in the fog to try to get the raptors to come after her. And she calls out. Muldoon comes out and bangs a rod against the fence. Ellie thinks that they're being too obvious. The raptors aren't going to come after them because they're going to know it's a trap. So she opens up the gate and walks out, so that it seems like she's just doing something she naturally would do. They do come out and start to attack. Muldoon pulls her in through the gate and slams it shut. The raptors hit the fence. That's how close they were. But one raptor is still missing. So they've got the raptors on the roof. They got these raptors that came to the gate, and one is still missing. And we know that it's probably in the maintenance shed. That's what we're thinking. But we go back to Lex and Tim in the kitchen, and the raptor is there. And we see Grant actually get all of the things done that he needs to. He just needs to get back to the visitor center control room. They need to get the power put back on manually now. And he finds Gennaro hiding down there. So they both are going to go back to the visitor center. When we go back to the kitchen where Tim and Lex are, Tim is putting down stakes to try to get the raptor to follow them. And he leads it into the freezer where he then slams the door shut. Then we go back to the lodge, and the raptors have left the skylight, which should be a huge warning sign. So Wu goes down and tells Ellie to come back in. And as he's yelling at her to come back in, the raptors jump down and attack and kill Wu. So Ellie runs off with these other raptors chasing her. She climbs up a tree. They start chasing her up the tree. She jumps onto the roof and tries to get in a door, but it's locked. The raptors are up there chasing her. And she realizes, I can either stay here on this roof and get killed by these raptors, or I can jump off the roof and try to land in the swimming pool, but I don't think I'm going to make it. So she jumps off the roof. Thankfully, she does make it, and then she runs back to the lodge door. Harding, the doctor, the veterinarian, hears her up on the roof and goes up to the door and does open it, and the raptors are there. And one of them gets his arm, but he luckily is able to close it. So there is just chaos in every area of this chapter happening right now. And now we have another big problem because Grant can try to get to the control room to try to do all the computer things manually, but Wu is dead. And he was the one remaining person who knew how to do it. The raptors are back up on the skylight again, and one of the raptors' head gets through the bars. The kids find the control room, and Tim is talking to Muldoon on the radio, and he says, "Well, I don't really know everything about computers, but I know something." So he is trying to get the power back on. 3 more raptors get into the visitor center, and Lexi and Tim hear them. They go out to look, and then the door closes behind them and they get locked out. And they see a dead guard at the end of the hallway, and so Tim realizes he needs to get that security guard's card. So they run down there, but the raptors see them and block their way back. So they go in the closest door they can get into just as the raptors start charging after them. Grant finally gets into the visitor center. Tim realizes what room they're in. It's the room with the little baby raptor that he played with earlier, and this part makes me so sad because then the raptors do get in and he throws the baby raptor at them as like a distraction, but it doesn't distract them from chasing the kids. They just kill the baby raptor. The kids find another door that leads them to the lab, but the raptors are still in pursuit. They find the corridor. They go through one more door and they run right into Grant and Gennaro. Grant tells them to try to get to the control room and he'll take care of the raptors, but they can't find a way out. So they are all trapped now, and Gennaro and the kids are behind behind a door, stuck in there, and Grant is out with the raptors, and they are now in the hatchery where the eggs are. Grant knows from earlier tours about some of these toxins that are in a syringe, and so he starts putting it into some of the eggs to make them poisonous and rolling them toward the raptors. One raptor eats it and does die, or begins to die. As he's dying, he bites another raptor. That whole scene, I felt like it was so intense. Such a good idea to put the toxin into the eggs and roll them toward the raptors, and then them kind of attacking each other. But then it gets to this point where it's like, okay, what else is going to happen? But then he has Ellie talk in the radio so that one of the dinosaurs will be attracted to it and he can get it with the syringe. And they are able to get to the control room. They're able to get the power back on just in time for the raptors that are in the bars almost through to get electrocuted and killed. They get the boat just in the nick of time. It turns around. That leads us into the 7th iteration. The second chapter in this iteration is called Under Control. And we find out that out of 24 people, 8 are dead and 6 are missing, as far as they can tell. There might be more. They call San Jose for help, and the National Guard is going to come to the island. There are actually 3 little raptors aboard that ship, and they kill them. Tim gets the animal counter up on the computer, and we find out that 203 out of the 292 animals are found. So we see that a lot of them have died, and they're able to watch on the screens a raptor attacking a hadrosaur, so they know the animals are really mixed in together. Grant turns to Gennaro at this time and says, "Your island is a mess, Mr. Gennaro. Your experiment is a mess. It has to be cleaned up, but you can't do that until you know the extent of the mess. And that means finding the nests on the island, especially the raptor nests. They'll be hidden. We have to find them and inspect them and count the eggs. We have to account for every animal born on this island. Then we can burn it down. But first, we have a little work to do. When you have made a mistake, you need to own it and take care of it." It was interesting to me how at this point of reading, I thought, okay, it's done. Everything's working again. They're all going to be saved. But now they're going to go out and purposely look for raptors. And I was so nervous. Please don't let any of my favorite characters die in these last few minutes. So they go out and they find a storage room that has grenades in it. So they gather those, and then they get the little raptor that he had brought back. They have it in a cage now. Lex has named it Clarence, and they're taking that raptor. They put a collar on it, and when they put the collar on it, they notice that its color briefly changes for a second, and Lex says something about it being like a chameleon. I think this is also when he finally got it all the way out there that the frog DNA is what made it so that the animals could change their sex in this environment. So Grant and Ellie and Gennaro all go looking for the raptor's nest. They find a hole in the ground, like a rabbit hole, and they go down into it. So what about everybody else? So everybody else is trying to deal with whatever problems they were in charge of. Malcolm is in a coma now. Hammond goes outside. He's thinking about the park and how it doesn't matter if they burn it to the ground because he knows that InGen has 2 separate vaults in Palo Alto where there are dozens of frozen embryos. And he's thinking to himself, we'll solve all the problems. We were too sloppy. Wu caused the downfall. John Arnold was ill-suited as the chief engineer. He's thinking he needs someone with more vision. Ed Regis was a poor choice. Harding was at best indifferent, not good or bad. Muldoon was a drunk. He would do better next time. Here we see exactly who Hammond is and why something like this would happen, because he has not taken any accountability for what just happened. He hasn't learned a thing. And then he hears a roar, and it scares him, and he thinks that the little T-Rex is close to him. He ends up falling down a hill and into a stream. And then we see that it's Lex and Timmy playing with the speaker system, and they're doing a T-Rex roar over the radio. And as he's trying to make his way back up the hill, the roar goes again and he hears them arguing and giggling. And so he realizes that it's the kids that did the sound. And he thinks he should have never brought the kids. They've been nothing but trouble since the beginning. We find out that the only reason he had the kids come was to try to persuade Gennaro not to destroy the resort, because he would see the wonder from the kids' perspective, which also gives us a new insight into Hammond as a grandfather. When we go back to Gennaro and Grant and Ellie, they're descending. There are 2 full-size raptors and babies all over. They are thinking that there's at least 30 raptors in where they're at. maybe more. And so they start counting the indentations of where the eggs were in the nest, and they think that it's 34. But they notice that the raptors keep all turning in the same direction. They're in like a cave now, and there's an exit, and all of the raptors run out. They, of course, are going to follow them, which I think we've just seen what the raptors do. Don't follow them. Just go back out now. You've counted. But it goes back to Hammond, and he gets his comeuppance, I guess, because he is attacked and killed by the compies. And in the chapter, it says Hammond lay very still as a child in its crib. And I think that Crichton put that sentence there on purpose to take our mind back to the child that was killed in its crib at the beginning of the book. They follow the raptors out onto a beach, and they're realizing that it seems like the raptors are wanting to migrate. And that's why they kept turning in the direction. While they're out there, a helicopter comes and soldiers run toward them. Muldoon and the kids are already aboard the helicopter and tell them to get on. Grant asks, what about the others? And they find out about Hammond, and then they find out that Malcolm is assumed dead. They say that he didn't make it. Then behind them, there starts to be explosions as they're flying away. There's bright orange fireball over the visitor center, and then white hot explosions one after another. So we know that they have annihilated this whole island. Then it goes to the epilogue, and they're in San Jose, and they're stuck in a hotel, not allowed to leave the country. And it says they did not even permit the burial of Hammond or Ian Malcolm. And that broke my heart. While they're at the pool, we see that the kids are still there too. And Marty Gutierrez from the beginning shows up, and he does say, well, we're probably going to let the kids leave, but the rest of you are pretty much here indefinitely. And he tells them about some strange animals. He says, this spring in the Ismaloya section, which is to the north, some unknown animals ate the crops in a very peculiar manner. They moved each day in a straight line, almost as straight as an arrow, from the coast into the mountains, into the jungle. It was like a migration. So Grant asked him, what crops are they eating? And he said they would only eat agama beans and soy and sometimes chickens. And Grant says, foods rich in lysine. And that leaves us at the end of the book with not knowing when Grant and the other adults are going to be allowed to come back home, to be sad and wonder about Ian Malcolm, because we didn't get to see him die, but we have heard he's dead, and to know that the island was destroyed, but obviously some animals have got off the island, and it sounds like they might be raptors, but they could be compies. And that's it. That's the end of the book. I love this book so much because I find that not only does it make me think so much because of the things that Malcolm says, but also just because of watching it play out. But it also is, I think it's so well written, but it's also so fast paced and so exciting and dramatic, but also so well written. And I feel like Michael Crichton does this so well with how much research he puts into it. He's really good at making me care about the characters. There's some characters that you don't care about as much, I think, or that blend together a little bit more. But for me, I feel like I had a really good picture of everybody in it. And so I was allowed to have characters that I did not like at all, like Nedry, of course, but also Hammond and Arnold, kind of, and Wu sometimes. But then ones that I really loved, really liked Muldoon, and I really liked Ellie and Alan and Malcolm and the kids. So, well, Lex a little bit less than Tim. I think that he did such a good job. I'm assuming if you've watched this that you have read the book, so that because of all the spoilers, I would love to know who your favorite characters were. Give me all of your thoughts about Jurassic Park. And in the next video, I'm going to talk about the visual history of Jurassic Park, which is another book that I read in between reading Jurassic Park and watching the movie. I'm going to talk about a few things I learned from that, along with talking about the movie, because I did rewatch it within about 3 or 4 days of reading the book. So that is coming up very soon.